The Louisville men's basketball team remains undefeated in ACC play after edging out the Pittsburgh Panthers on Wednesday evening. We'll talk about everything you need to know from that contest and more on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Stay tuned.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome in to another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode is brought to you by Netsuite. Netsuite is the #1 cloud financial system to power your growth. Head to netsuite.com/lockedonncaa for special end-of-year financing on the #1 financial system for growing businesses. I want to take this time to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services and including YouTube now. 5 days a week, your team every day. Last night, the Cardinals extended their undefeated streak to begin ACC play now at 4 after defeating the Pittsburgh Panthers 75-72 at the KFC Yum Center. We'll talk about initial takeaways and reactions from that contest, which admittedly was a pretty ugly win, but as I'll tell you, a win is a win. We'll then transition into finding the positives from that result, and then in the last segment, we'll preview the Louisville women's basketball team's matchup with the Pittsburgh Panthers that will take place tonight at the KFC Yum Center. Before we get into the content of today's show, like I mentioned, for those who are not aware of who I am, my name is Dalton Pence. I'm a credentialed media member for Cardinal Sports Zone, where I serve as both a football beat writer and a recruiting analyst. Also do some PA announcing work for the university in various sports. You can check out my personal Twitter at the handle in the graphic at the bottom left hand of your screen. And you can check out the podcast Twitter page at LO_Louisville. So let's get right on into the show. As I mentioned, the Louisville men's basketball team 75-72 victory over the Pittsburgh Panthers last night at the KFC Yum Center. Talking the initial takeaways and reaction. I think my initial takeaway from the match is it was an ugly win, but at the end of the day, a win is a win is a win, as the tale as old as time says. We say this statement over and over. A win in conference play is well deserved either way, regardless of how good the opponent is. And that statement is shown and reflected through what happened on Wednesday evening. For the record, if you watched the episode on YouTube from Tuesday in the preview episode, or if you listen to it on whatever streaming service, you'll notice and remember that I predicted a double-digit victory for the Louisville Cardinals in this matchup, and that just did not come to fruition. I felt like Pittsburgh hung around for the most part of the game. They had a chance at the very end to tie it and send it into overtime. The shot did not fall. I felt like Louisville played down to their competition, for lack of better terms. It's no disrespect to Pittsburgh, but I felt like Louisville could have definitely played better. There were some instances where the offense got cold, like we've seen, all throughout this season. And then the defense struggled at certain times in this game. It was a little bit uncharacteristic for this team in some instances that I hadn't kind of seen throughout this year. So kind of breaking down the game, I got to start with what in the world, were all of those technical fouls? I feel like there has to be some type of record for a game in which the most technical fouls are given out in an instance that doesn't involve like a physical altercation or a big brawl or anything like that. There were 9 technical fouls handed out between the two teams, 5 for Louisville, 4 for Pittsburgh. And I think, it seemed like Louisville started out the game in the first 2 minutes. There was 2 or 3 technical fouls handed out on Pittsburgh. The most notable coming at the very end for Louisville. Chris Mack got the technical foul. Maybe Malik Williams as well. I forget. There were so many tossed out that allowed Pittsburgh a chance to end up tying the game at the end. Thankfully, that comeback wasn't able to be completed. Chris Mack said he's like, I've got to be better. Thankfully, it didn't. We're not sitting here singing a different tune, holding on to a loss or anything like that. So it's good that, there weren't many implications from that. But overall, I think that it's hard to spin this in a positive way because yes, a win is a win, and Louisville is 4-0 in the ACC. You can't overlook that. I get it. It's not necessarily a convincing win. I mean, Pittsburgh has the worst record in the ACC. They're 5-9 now. None of those 5 wins have come against a Power 5 opponent. They have competed in both ACC matches leading into this one, but so far, they've not been able to put anything together. I thought that the offense at times looked pretty decent, but it was a free throw fest in this one. Overall, between both teams, there were 57 free throws attempted, 27 for Pittsburgh, 30 for Louisville. The Cards and Pittsburgh shot the same identical three-point percentage, both 33.3%, 7-21 from the field. The turnover-wise, 12 for Louisville, 11 for Pittsburgh. They had 5 steals compared to Pittsburgh's 4, 14 assisted baskets, 2 blocks, etc. Louisville had the largest lead of the night with 8. Overall, it's just one of those games to where I thought this was going to be an opportunity in which the Cardinals were going to be able to, try to work through some of the kinks that they've had at the beginning of the season and be able to turn the corner with a momentum-building win. Unfortunately, it wasn't necessarily in convincing fashion, but like I mentioned, a win is a win. You have to, accept it for what it is. You don't necessarily have to be too pleased with it, but you would rather have an ugly win rather than, a pleasing loss. And I'm not necessarily sure if there is such a thing as a pleasing loss. I'm not a big moral victory type of person. I just don't believe in them. I think that you can take some positives away from a loss or from a bad performance. But, there's a fine line between, finding the positives and kind of sunshine pumping. That's just not my style. So you won't get that type of analysis, I should say, on this show, just for warning. But overall, Ellis, spectacular tonight. We'll talk about him in the next segment. But he led the Cardinals, I believe, with 18 points on the evening, 6 for 10 from the field. I thought Sam Williamson played pretty decently. Noah Locke continued a stretch of good performances. After that, it looked like Malik Williams kind of sustained, some sort of injury in the match, and maybe that had hindered him defensively at times. But I thought for the most part, Louisville really wasn't able to get in a rhythm. In the first half when they got that lead, it looked like, okay, this is going to be the instance where the Cards pull away. They're up by double digits in the second half, and they kind of coast to victory. They allowed Pittsburgh to stay in the match, and they stayed in it till the very end. So I wish it was different circumstances. It's not, like I said, it's not convincing. It's not pretty. Pittsburgh is probably going to be one of, if not the worst team in the ACC. The Cards will travel up to Pennsylvania here in a couple weeks to take on the Panthers. It might be. I'll have to look into that. It might actually be. Is it next week? Not next week. It can't be. No. It's next week. It's actually the 15th. So that's next Saturday. So they will face Pittsburgh again. We'll kind of see how they do up in Pittsburgh. But ultimately, if you were looking for a result that kind of convinced you that Louisville is starting to put things together, it might not necessarily have come in these 40 minutes just because, a win's a win, but not necessarily, kind of moving the needle and convincing anyone in the process. But as kind of bleak as the performance was for the most part for Louisville, they got the job done. You have to celebrate that accordingly and respectively. There are some positives to take away from this contest for Louisville. It's very key that you do so because we saw some good things. We'll talk about those here in a second after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show at Netsuite. I want you to imagine a scenario. This is it, the putt to win the tournament. If you sink it, the championship is yours. But on your backswing, your hat falls over your eyes. Is this how you're running your business? Poor visibility because you're still relying on spreadsheets and outdated finance software? To see the full picture, you need to upgrade to NetSuite by Oracle. It's the #1 cloud financial system to power your growth. Everything you need to grow all in one place. With NetSuite, you can automate your processes and close your books in no time while staying well ahead of the competition. Over 28,000 businesses already use NetSuite. And for the new year, NetSuite has a new financing program for those ready to upgrade at netsuite.com/locked. Once again, head to netsuite.com/locked for the special one-of-a-kind financing offer on the #1 financial system for growing businesses, netsuite.com/locked. All right, there are some key positives to take away from Louisville's 75-72 close victory over the Pittsburgh Panthers. Like I mentioned, not necessarily a convincing win, but a win is a win, and in itself, that is a positive. Before we get into the individual breakdown, and there's three key individuals that I want to focus on and give some stars of the game, if you will, or however you want to kind of three positives or something like that, however you want to kind of define that or identify it, etc. I think you have to realize, look, I say this knowing that there are two sides to this. Number one, and I'm going to address the devil's advocate, which is a very, very realistic and a very justified take, and that's the fact that all four of Louisville's ACC games have been coming down to the wire. All four have ended up being decided in the final minute, in the final 30 seconds, so to speak, in most of them. Georgia Tech, Georgia Tech, NC State, Pittsburgh now, all pretty much coming down to the last possession or so, and Wake Forest was right there as well. So you can make the argument that some of these games, especially the one like last night, should not have been this close. That in itself is a little concerning. I do agree. I am not telling you that you're wrong. I'm not telling you that you need to be more positive, but I will introduce this. And it's a way that you can think of things that's not sunshine pumping. It's not overlooking that some things need to be improved on. It's not overlooking that some things, some players need to play better. Some things need to change, offensively and stuff like that. That is the fact that all four of these close games have ended up in Cardinal victories. Now, like I said, I think that Louisville is better than all four of the teams that they have played so far in conference play? Of course, yes, of course I do. Should they have been, that close in games? If they handle business throughout and don't go through some scoring droughts, we might be singing a different tune. But if you're going to look at any type of positive in this situation, it's the fact that when it does come down to crunch time, Louisville is handling business. They seemingly are playing their best ball in the final 2 minutes of each of these ACC games. That's not a trend that we are, unfamiliar to, because we saw it against Maryland. Was an opportunity to where, the game was very close at the end and the Cardinals were able to come out on top. So ultimately, I like what I'm seeing from Louisville in crunch time, and you can't underestimate that. That is a key phenomenon that's happening. That, yes, hey, look, we may be struggling for the most part of games, and something needs to be figured out there. I'm not suggesting that we overlook it because Louisville is being clutch, so to speak. But what I am saying is that you can acknowledge the fact that, there are some scoring droughts, there are some improvements that, that have continually, popped their head that we need to see made, due to some problems that we're seeing. But you have to acknowledge the fact that Louisville is at least handling business at the very end. And like I mentioned, a win is a win. You have to accumulate wins where you can. You have to avoid bad losses. So far in conference play, sure, it has only been 4 games. And it gets tougher from here on out, but Louisville has handled business. So you cannot, don't overlook that. Don't discredit it or undermine it, because it is something that we'll look forward to, and hopefully it stays a trend throughout the rest of the season. But let's go into the individual aspect of things. Ellis, hat off to him. I thought that he played spectacular, especially in the second half. Hit a couple of key shots, especially a perimeter shooting. Led the way with 18 points here for the Cardinals in this one, and I was very impressed with what he did. 6 for 10 from the field, from the three-point line. He went 2 for 4, 4 for 6 from the line, like I mentioned. Led the way, 18 points. 19 minutes, so the level of production that we saw from him and the limited amount of time that we saw of him, it definitely bodes well. And it's one thing I said, I truly believe that he is the most talented player on this roster. Kind of reminds me of freshman year Russ Smith. If you can go back here in your memory to the 2010-2011 season, where Russ Smith was, showed signs that he could be really, really good, and ultimately he reached those levels, obviously, and probably a little bit, past those levels, being a multi-first team All-American. But also, during his freshman year was very inconsistent, was wild at times. You could tell the speed was affecting his play. Defensively, not necessarily the greatest. Gambled here and there, wasn't necessarily too keen to the team defense, so to speak, in a cohesive standpoint. I think that's kind of what we're seeing from Ellis right now. We're seeing, the explosiveness is there. He's the best athlete on the team. He probably has the most talent. You've seen that he can shoot the ball from deep. I like, even though he hasn't been entrusted with the responsibility of being, the true facilitator, and only didn't even have an assist last night against Pittsburgh. I do think that his ability to pass the ball and be a facilitator does bode well for Louisville down the road, because we're going to have to start to have the conversation of, okay, is Jared West going to remain the starter at point guard for Louisville, with these offensive issues? We know what he brings to the table defensively. Could we bring Ellis or Mason Faulkner into that lead guard role to start the game out to try to get, off to a good start? Ellis is starting to push the envelope on that overall conversation, because I feel like he gives your team probably the most offensive upside of any of the three point guards on the roster. So you have to start to ask these things. I think that defensively he's still getting better. Once he continues to get acclimated to the speed of ACC play and of high level Power 5 Division 1 level basketball, he's going to continue to get better. This is an opportunity for him. We mentioned that Pittsburgh was going to be an opportunity for some players to get going and try to get out of a slump, or try to put together a solid foundation for good performances. This could be the performance for Ellis, and we could definitely use that, something like that down in Tallahassee on Saturday, which we will preview that matchup on tomorrow's episode. But Ellis is the top star for this one. I also liked what I saw from Noah Locke. Noah Locke didn't necessarily like the score sheet up, only had 13 points in 30 minutes of play, 4 for 9 from the field, 3 for 7 from three-point line, 2 for 4 from the free throw line, 4 rebounds, no assists, no steals, no blocks, 1 personal foul. He's continued to, like we saw against, against NC State, like we saw against Georgia Tech and Wake Forest, and now like we've seen against Pittsburgh. Even if he's not necessarily lighting it up, he has that clutch gene. He's hitting big shots down the stretch. The main thing of him has been consistency and more efficiency as a shooter. We're seeing him get a little bit better in that regard. I liked what I saw from him. He didn't play bad. He didn't play great either, but I thought he played pretty solid. Another guy that played solid is Sam Williamson. He's a player that Jeremy Wallman, when he came on the show for yesterday's episode, he mentioned, he said, look, I think that Sam Williamson is going to be the guy that's able to turn things around and turn the corner, so to speak. If you look at the stat sheet, you're not going to get that impression. He had 9 points and 5 rebounds in 21 minutes of play. He's back in the starting lineup for Louisville. But what I will say is the fact that the buckets that he did get, I thought he looked pretty confident on his mid-range jumpers, which proved to be a big spark down the road. That was some big buckets down the stretch in this one. In this one, he had a big defensive block in this one. Pretty solid defensively for a Louisville team that didn't necessarily play all that great on defense. Considering that Jamarius Burton had 21.6 rebounds, John Hughley 11 points, so on and so forth. They did, however, Pittsburgh did get back. I think it's Ithiel Horton. His first game. One of his first games back. He was the only returning starter from last year's team for Pittsburgh. He had 13 in this contest tonight. So liked what I saw from El, liked what I saw from Noah, and liked what I saw from Sam. Like I mentioned, we will continue to talk Louisville men's basketball in tomorrow's episode as we preview the Florida State Seminoles. For the remainder of the show, I want to talk about the Louisville women's basketball team, who ironically will play Pittsburgh tonight at the KFC Yum Center at 6 o'clock. We'll preview that matchup on the next segment after we talk about our friends at Get Upside. Hey, Cardinal fans, once again, this is your host, Dalton Pence, with an incredible app everyone who buys gas needs to know about, Get Upside. My listeners are making up to 25 cents for every gallon of gas every time they fill up. Just download the free Get Upside app in the App Store or Google Play and use the promo code SCORE and get a bonus 25 cents per gallon on your first fill up. That's up to 50 cents cash back. Don't pay full price at the pump anymore. Get cash back using Get Upside. Some people who drive a lot are making as much as $200 to $300 a month in cash back, and there's no catch. You can cash out anytime to your bank account, PayPal, or an e-gift card for Amazon and other brands. Download the free Get Upside app and use the promo code SCORE to get up to 50 cents per gallon cash back on your first tank. I also want to talk about our friends at BetOnline. BetOnline would like to wish you a happy new betting year. As we continue our march to the playoffs and beyond, it remains your number one spot for all the best sports wagering action for 2022. New year and a new updated desktop and mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit by using the promo code LOCKEDON. From football, basketball, hockey, boxing, UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for 2022. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to wager on all of your favorite sports, and BetOnline is where the game starts. Like I mentioned, the Louisville Cardinals looking to extend their 12-game winning streak as they take on the Pittsburgh Panthers tonight at the KFC Yum Center. 6 o'clock tip-off got moved up from 7 o'clock, so make sure of that note, I would assume due to the possible inclement weather that could be moving through the area on Thursday. But this is a matchup to where Louisville has the opportunity to take advantage of a team that turns the ball over a lot and does not necessarily shoot that well from behind the arc. When you look at what Pittsburgh has done on the season so far, they are 9-4, currently 12th in the ACC, which doesn't matter too much because teams really haven't played all that much conference competition. But they are 0-2, which is notable. Both of the losses have come against ranked opponents, and they have been blowouts against the North Carolina State Wolfpack, 89-54, falling in defeat to Westmore's team, and then they played in South Bend last week at Notre Dame, and it was an 85-59 blowout loss. The other two losses on the year to South Dakota, 72-61, and to a ranked Texas A&M team, 57-46. Their wins, I'm not necessarily sure outside of Rutgers if one of those wins has been to a ranked opponent. Rutgers has shown that they're pretty solid this year. They just beat Michigan. However, this is going to be like another instance like Boston College for the Louisville women's basketball team. I do think that it could end up being a 20-point, 25-point victory for Louisville. When you look at what Pittsburgh is doing offensively, Jayla Everett leading the way for the team, 15 points per game for the Panthers. Amber Brown is the only one close to double digits after that with 9.5 points per game. They're a team that does very well on the glass, but like I mentioned, they're turning the ball over a lot more than their opponent. They've turned the ball over this season 239 times, comparing that to their opponent's totals when they played the Panthers, and that is 188. So overall, this is a team that's kind of careless with the basketball, so to speak, and that bodes well for a Louisville team that holds teams to less than 49 points per game. So the keys to the game for the Cardinals, there's two main ones. Number one, and that is, basically, I don't want to say this in a general sense because I think it's kind of lazy, but it's to get those turnover numbers up because as we've seen this year, I think that Louisville's best offense sometimes has been a direct result and byproduct of their best defense, forcing turnovers, getting out in transition, allowing, your athletes to get out and, whether that be pulling up on fast break threes or getting to the rack. I like Louisville's odds in this one. The fact that Pittsburgh is not necessarily that great of, a team holding on to the ball. They score just a little bit more than the Cardinals, I believe. I think they're averaging just around, give or take. It's about 60. I think they're 66.38 points per game. Opponent-wise, they're holding their opponent to about 4 points less per game. So not necessarily the greatest team defensively, not necessarily the greatest team offensively. Respectable offensively, so Louisville will have to, pay attention to detail, make life miserable for the opposing Panthers. The number one key to the game, though, for the Cardinals is winning the rebounding margin. We've seen if the Cards out-rebound their opponents, I think that there's a running trend that Jeff Walls and the coaching staff have to do like 50 push-ups. We saw a clip of that after they out-rebounded the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. But on the season, rebounding margin, Pittsburgh is out-rebounding their opponents by about, give or take, probably 8 rebounds per game. So that's one to where if Pittsburgh is going to come into Louisville to pull off the upset tonight it's going to be because they get a lot of second chance opportunity points, and Louisville would have to struggle from the field offensively. But ultimately, I think that this is a game that Louisville wins by probably about 20, maybe 25 points. I look for Haley Van Lith. This is a game to where I think she has a big performance. Also think that Olivia Cochran playing a little bit better as the weeks go on. This is a game to where I think, the super sophomores, as I sometimes call it. Actually, I've never called them that. That just kind of, came off right off the top of the dome. I don't know how I feel about that. Super sophomores. Super seniors. People call people super seniors. If it's like an extra, the COVID year or, 6-year senior. But I've never heard anyone call them super sophomores. So, whatever. It is what it is. But you get the point. These players, maybe Haley, Olivia haven't necessarily lived up to the potential that we maybe have thought they were going to see in year 2 at Louisville. But I think that they're continually playing better and better. Haley is on the brink of having an absolute huge performance. I think it could come tonight against the Pittsburgh Panthers. Olivia Cochran has been getting better and better as the season goes on. This could be an opportunity for her as well. But predicting about a 20-point victory for the Cards against the Panthers, who in their 2 ACC matches against ranked teams have gotten absolutely destroyed. So we will recap that matchup and that contest on tomorrow's episode while previewing the men's basketball game against Florida State that will happen in Tallahassee over the weekend, and the women's basketball preview for Miami, etc. So, like I mentioned before we get out of here, a couple quick shout-outs. First, the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast, the most recent episode dropping last Sunday. You can check that out at cardinalsportszone.com. Also, the Locked On Bets podcast hosted by your boy Q with a handicapping expert from Lee Sterling. You can get that on the Odyssey app or wherever you like to get your podcast. Everyone be safe tonight. Louisville weather is a little bit tricky, so by the time this gets published, who knows how much precipitation accumulates overnight. So be safe driving out. Check out the Cards if you can at the KFC Center. We'd love to see you there. Everyone have a great and safe day. Go Cards, and we'll see you right back here tomorrow.